Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I'm joined by Arlene Faulk, a Tai Chi instructor who was diagnosed with MS at age 40 after having symptoms at the age of 22. She is the author of Walking on Pins and Needles, a memoir of chronic resilience in the face of multiple sclerosis. She's here to tell her story of trying to understand what was happening to her and how she found a healing path through Chinese medicine and Tai Chi. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in one of my seminars, join my monthly membership group, or purchase any of my mind-body guides, also known as the PDFs, at www.crushingdoubt.org. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Arlene Falk. Arlene, thank you so much for joining me here. It's always an honor to talk to people who've been through experiences and they're willing to share them with me and my audience, so I'm so appreciative to have you here.
Thank you for asking me, Dan. I'm looking forward to it.
So you have a really, I would say it's a fascinating story, but I know that living it probably wasn't fascinating along the way, at least a lot of the time. It sounds like it was really, really hard. And you wrote a book on this. We're going to get to the book a little bit later. But I always start off in these interviews talking about where did the symptoms start? If I understood correctly, they began when you were 22 years old.
That's correct, right.
Take me through what happened.
Okay. I'm 22 years old, was 22 years old, right out of college. I had graduated in May, and this was September. I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, for my first job, which I hope would be a career. And in one afternoon, I lost the feeling from my waist down. It started with feeling like needles were jabbed into my skin, and then numbness, and then some pain, and then numbness. And then I was having trouble walking when it hit the bottom of my feet and I couldn't feel the floor. I had trouble walking. So I was a trainee in a major department store, and I had to sit down and was very frightened because I didn't know what was going on. And it was quite dramatic.
It's just a terrifying kind of experience for anyone to have, and the suddenness of it must have just
Right.
been baffling and so scary. So tell me what then happened. Did you go to see a doctor pretty much immediately? What happened?
I did go to see a doctor. My boss referred me to somebody. In fact, he actually took me to see the doctor because I was relatively new. I was young. I didn't have any medical professionals that I had seen yet. And so they did tests. They did a CAT scan. They did some neurological tests and said, I think that you need to go to a bigger institution, a research institution, and get further tests. My father was a general practitioner, and so I had him as a resource to help me get into research institute. At this point, I went to the University of Iowa in Iowa City and had CAT scans, spinal tap, other neurological tests. MRI was not an available test at that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, which it's going to sound really obvious at first in terms of that obviously you would have been terrified and all kinds of things, but what kinds of thoughts were you having? Because one of the reasons I do this work is I want to help people to understand that they're not alone, that people have very similar types of thoughts in these kinds of experiences. And when it's such a sudden onset and then it lasts a long time, it's like a whole new life has begun. That's what I'm imagining based on your experience. It certainly was for me. I had 8 years of back pain. It was and it was sudden onset. So I was like, what's
sudden
happening?
Onset. Yes, I think the sudden onset it's just like it's so scary that at first you don't know what to think, what's going on. You can't make I couldn't make any sense of it. And I thought, hopefully this will just go away, that something's going on, it'll just go away, but it continued to get worse. I was young, so I can't say that my life flashed before my eyes, but in a way it did. I was just starting my career, and I thought, oh, is this the end? I mean, is everything that I'm dreaming about and what I would like to do done before I even start? And how do I find out what's wrong? How do it was just really, really scary. So it was It was anxiety. It was fear, fear of the unknown, fear of my body betraying me, and not knowing what the next step was. And at that point, I didn't have the resources. As I said, medically, I had my father, but he wasn't local to go check things out. So all that uncertainty and fear overtook me.
Did you imagine it was any particular thing? You know, because we kind of fill in the blanks when we don't know.
Well, yeah, we do. It's really a good question, but I had been healthy up to that point. So there wasn't anything that where I was thinking, oh my, this is this condition, or I wouldn't have thought about MS at the time. I really didn't know much about it. And that was, I didn't have any thoughts to fill the void. It's almost like it was a void, and the fear filled the void.
Yep. Well, so my podcast, as you know, is called Crushing Doubt, and fear is one of I call it the emotional form of doubt.
Yes.
Doubt does fill all the gaps, and that's exactly why I try to highlight it. If we can bring that into conscious experience, smooth them out, get doubts settled, our whole fear system comes down, and we have a much better chance to deal with the symptoms or understand what they are and get them under control. So how long did it take before you got the MS diagnosis?
It took 21 years. It was a very long time. I mean, I to say that, people are just shocked when I say that, but it did take 21 years. I recovered after about 3 months from that incident that I told you about in Minneapolis. And I was young. I wanted to go on with my life, but I had an inconclusive. I heard a lot of inconclusive statements from doctors in my life, and that was inconclusive. Mm-hmm. So it got better. I went on with my life. I didn't think about it, and it was 2 to 3 years later. I was in graduate school when I was walking home from class, and I just had a strip on my side from really my belly button to the middle of my back. I'd say about maybe 4 to 6 inches. That was numb, and it just was. In my mind, I thought, oh, I wonder what that is. I wonder if this is something. But then once again, I just put it in the back of my mind, and I kept going. So it wasn't until it was about 6 or 7 years before I started having symptoms that increasingly got worse.
Okay, let's jump back for a sec though, because
okay.
You lost all the feeling below your waist. If my understanding is that you regained your mobility. Okay, you could walk.
Right,
but you
I did
couldn't
about
feel
three
anything.
months. Yeah.
It was about 3 months later that you got the mobility back.
It took about that long, yes.
And did the numbness then continue to last throughout, or did that ultimately go away as well temporarily, or what happened?
That ultimately went away. I gained full recovery of mobility as well as feeling.
How long did it take to get the feeling back?
That first time, it was about 3.5, 4 months. I had complete feeling back.
Okay, so mobility and feeling kind of came back similar
for me,
time.
that went together. Yes, it did go together.
Got it. During the time, so you returned to feeling totally, I wouldn't say totally normal. Who could feel normal after that? But you're, from a physical standpoint, you then went on thinking, okay, I don't know what that was, but I guess I'm okay? Or where was your mindset?
That's where my mindset was. I just put it in the back of my mind and said, well, that is behind me, and I'm going to move on, even though the medical people don't know what it is. There are a lot of things that are uncertain, and so I'll just move on with my life. And I've just not only put it in the back of my mind, I really wasn't thinking about it. I was moving on with my life.
Okay, so you didn't, this is interesting because you went through a really, I would say, a kind of traumatic experience, but you were able to move on from the fear relatively okay at that point.
At that point, yes.
So when you had this second bout of numbness come up, take me through your thoughts then.
My thoughts, it was, like a curiosity, thinking, I wonder what that is. And it was uncertainty. I had some anxiety, not a lot of fear then, because it was minor. That only lasted one day, and my feeling came back. And so it was short-lived. So I didn't have a lot of time to be thinking about what is it, or should I be concerned? So again, what I tended to do was shove it in the back of my mind and then go on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then these symptoms kind of kept coming back from time to time? What happened from there?
From time to time, it would be sections on my body, generally around my rib cage, like I mentioned, the incident that I just was talking about, until about, let's see, it would be about 7 years later from the first losing the feeling from my waist down, that I had some feeling where my skin felt like needles or needles or pins were in my skin. It started feeling like I was plugged into an electric socket. There was that feeling of some movement, like I wouldn't have called it energy at the time, but electricity. And it started to be painful. And that's when I started to get concerned, because I thought, okay, I didn't really deal with what happened when I was 22. I had just a couple incidents since then that I shoved in the back of my mind. But here we go. And I think this is something. And I need to try to find out what it is. It was scary because one of the most scary things throughout my whole experience in dealing with MS is uncertainty, the uncertainty about what is next, or if there is some known way to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Uncertainty is the base level of doubt, so it's exactly what I talk about, and I can imagine it does seem like you were able to keep doubt at bay enough for a while by saying, well, I'm curious, or I can just shove it to the side.
Right.
But eventually it got in your mind and you started to say, what is this? Did you find your symptoms went up when the uncertainty got to that point? I'm curious about that.
It's a really good question. I looked at uncertainty as being scary. I don't know that it did, because eventually it did as it went on for a while, because it got worse and worse. And when I started to lose mobility, my ability to walk, then that
pretty scary.
My job. Yeah, it was scary in terms of being able to function in the world, like crossing the street or walking in my own home without falling. Then I think it really started. The uncertainty created a lot of doubts about not only what it was, but I thought it's going to get worse. I really thought, okay, it's going to get worse. I don't know what it is. And the time with the tests, I had a lot of CAT scans. I had the spinal taps, as I mentioned, but nothing conclusive. And so it continually, over the years, the uncertainty got worse, because I was getting worse, and so was the uncertainty, and they didn't know what it was. And I'm thinking, why can't they figure this out? Why can't they figure this out and help me?
Yeah, and if symptoms are getting worse and you're not getting any answers, how could your uncertainty not go up? How could your fear not go up? I mean, and how could you not necessarily think maybe this is going to get worse? Because you weren't getting any signals that it was going to get more under control.
No, I was not getting any signals. No.
All right. Now, in your book, which again, I'm mostly going to dive into in a little bit because I want to find out what made you write the book, but hold off on that question for a sec. In the book, I know you talk some about your work and rising up kind of the corporate ladder with these symptoms and trying to negotiate them. What was that like? Did you feel that you had to hide the symptoms? Were you ashamed of them, worried about them? What was the relationship there?
It's an excellent question, because that was a central part of my journey at that time in terms of how to handle it with the work situation. I was working for a major airline in a very hectic environment and doing very well. I had a couple promotions in my first 2 years, and was asked to take a job. I was in Chicago and was asked to take a job in New York City, became a manager, only woman manager at the time. And so I was doing very well in my career and moving up the ladder. So how does that relate to my situation with my symptoms? I thought about it a lot, and I didn't say anything for many years. And the reason I didn't, I tried to handle it myself without saying anything in my work environment, The reason I did that was I was very concerned that it would affect my career negatively, that I would be seen as weak, not necessarily capable of handling the stress or handling the workload, and that I would not get the promotions and the recognition that I was hoping that I would get in my career. Looking back, I think I was probably right. Just looking at other people and seeing the situation, that I probably was right. But it took its toll because of keeping all that inside. Then I had to try extra hard to sometimes lift my leg, to get up a curb, and sitting there filled with a lot of prednisone at times in meetings, and be really lucid. It was really challenging. My main approach that got me through at this time that we're talking about now was mind over matter. I said to myself, okay, Arlene, push yourself through it. You are really being rewarded for your mind, not what your body is doing, and you can do that. And for many years, I did that, and mind over matter, and it worked until my body stopped me. I learned, certainly I would say the hard way, my body stopped me, but that doesn't work. That has it has a price, and it has a really big price.
So let's talk about this period when your body told you no more. How old were you when that period hit?
I was in my early 40s.
And take me through it. What happened? How did it go?
So what happened was I drove 26 miles to work. I lived in downtown Chicago, and the headquarters of the airlines out in northwest suburb. So that becomes important in just a minute. So I went into work. There had been, and I explain this in my book, a lot of change and wild things happening in the industry. It was in the Gulf War crisis, where oil took a dive. The airline had been expanding, and suddenly everything was contracting. And the departments were being lopped off, and budgets were being cut. And we're talking about multi-million dollars here. And I went through that. I was the head of a department, and we walked into a meeting and said, we've got to cut $325 million out of our whole division budget. I was one of the departments in the division. And what ended up was my department got eliminated. My department got eliminated. So I was offered another position. And I didn't want to take it. I wanted to leave, but it was at the time when I was uninsurable. This pre-existing condition, we hear about it today, but at the time I was going through this, there was no way I could get insurance. And I was told by an insurance company that a label, regardless how serious it is, you are not insurable. So I stayed on, I was offered a job. Third day on the new job, I walked in the office and my head started spinning. Things were blurry. And in probably the span of, I'd say it was about an hour, fatigue overcame me so much, my whole body, that I could barely stand up. And I thought, I've got to get out of here. I've got to go home. I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't have an office mate at that time. And somehow, some way, I got in my car and I drove 26 miles home. And then I thought, of course, once again, that it was going to get better. It didn't. I ended up lying on my couch for 2 years after being that busy, and that I just couldn't do it. I tried to go back. I tried to get up at times, but I couldn't do it. So
wow,
that was a
Arlene,
difficult.
sounds incredibly difficult and very not only scary but also daunting,
Yeah.
as you try to figure out what to do with your life in that situation.
Right.
Looking back, do you see how strongly that correlation is? Because I talk to people about the timing of symptoms and how important it is. You came back to this new job, which was essentially, your job had been phased out and you were having to settle for something.
Right.
And 3 days later, you were floored and on a couch for 2 years after that. It seems like there's a pretty strong correlation between these events, but I'm curious what you think.
I see it more in retrospect now, but what you're talking about, and you're dealing with People who are looking at or trying to see if there is a connection or how strong the connection is, absolutely
Hmm.
there's a connection. I don't know that I did see that at the time, but it wasn't just the stress that brought it on. It was the keeping it quiet, the symptoms getting worse, being filled with prednisone. I think it was a combination of things, but the timing of those two absolutely was not coincidental.
Sure. So when would you say you began your true healing process about this, where it was moving beyond just mind over matter and getting into, my understanding is that you got into Chinese medicine and Tai Chi, and these are the things that lifted you out of it. When did that begin?
That began. I mentioned that I had been on my couch for 2 years and not doing too much. I had people help me with cooking and other things. So I tried to figure out what to do. I did some reading. I did self-help books. Tried to figure out what to do, but my analytical skills, my decision making, my leadership, all that had served me so well was not helping at all. And it was a good friend of mine who was a CEO of a nonprofit, had some fatigue issues that were quite daunting for her. Not as bad as mine, but they were still daunting. She had trouble getting out of bed. Excuse me. And she tried all these tests, went to Western doctors, thought maybe it was heart, neurology, on, and was recommended to go to see a Chinese doctor in Chinatown here in Chicago. She did that, and he recommended that she get some body work, some not just massage, but working on the acupuncture points. So she did that, and she recommended this person to me. Her name was Nancy. And I was skeptical because I come from a Western medicine family. I didn't know anything about acupuncture work. And one day I thought I got a note from my friend who recommended Nancy. And it just said a gentle reminder and had her business card on it. There was something that clicked that day with that card that caused me to get off my couch, go to the phone, and make an appointment. And that started my journey to through healing with the Chinese medicine. Acupuncture was too strong for me early on. I felt like I was being plugged into an electric socket. It was working. It was opening me up, and I think, oh my heavens, I haven't felt like this in years. And then it would close down, and it would be an awful pain. So I didn't know if it was going to work or not. I stuck with it. I just said I've got to stick with it, and I did that. And it was my healer Nancy who recommended I try Tai Chi. She had been to China in a practicum, and she was dealing with MS patients. And through a translator, she asked these patients, they carried around their medical records, and they had pictures, and they'd been in wheelchairs and on canes, and they were mobile. She said, what do you attribute your health to? And she said, consistently, they said three things, and that is diet, some kind of diet, body work, and Tai Chi. And she said, Arlene, you're doing well on the first two. Why don't you try Tai Chi? So that's how I started with Tai Chi.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm clear on something, especially for my
Sure.
viewers as well. In terms of the symptoms, you started off with numbness that could take away mobility.
Right.
Then I don't know if it morphed into a kind of chronic fatigue or if that was on top of that.
That was on top of that.
Okay, and then you were mentioned pain at one point during the acupuncture thing. Where were the pains?
Okay, so the pain in my legs and my arms, mostly in my legs and the bottom of my feet. And I would go from numbness, not having any feeling on the bottom of my feet, to very strong needle-like pain. I grew to think that there must be a very fine line between numbness and acute pain because it just was one and then nothing in terms of.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happened? One of the things that I haven't mentioned as strongly yet is that once the pain would come and the inflammation was there, I was in my body. I would my right leg would be weak and my ankle would start to give out, and then I'd have trouble walking. So that
Okay,
movement of putting your foot down and then moving to the front of your foot, the ankle movement there, I'd lost that completely at times where I had to just pick up my foot and set it down straight down on the bottom of my foot.
wow. So one of the reasons I ask this is a lot of times people will come to me and they'll say, well, I just don't know if you can help me because I don't really have chronic pain. They'll describe other symptoms.
Right.
And this is one of the reasons I wanted to interview someone like you, because the variety of experiences people can have in the mind-body experience is as wide as physical experiences are. Anything can be a mind-body experience if it can be experienced physically. And you are a good example of that because you had such a wide variety.
Right.
So now I want to hear...
it's more than chronic. For me, it was more than chronic pain. That's an issue, and people deal with that in many different manifestations. But for me, it was more than that.
Absolutely. So you were diagnosed then. This was after the fatigue that you were diagnosed with the MS? What's the time frame of that?
The time frame I had, it was that episode I mentioned where the fatigue overtook me that one morning. That was 2 years after I was diagnosed.
Okay.
I was diagnosed before. I had, at the time, I mentioned oral prednisone. The other thing that the treatment that I had was being in the hospital, an inpatient infusion of steroids. And at one of those hospitalizations, they had the MRI. They were telling me it was a new test. It was in the market. It might show. And that's when they diagnosed that it was MS.
Okay. So let's jump to this part about Tai Chi. How old were you when Nancy introduced you to that?
So I was in my 44 or 45, mid-40s.
Okay. How did it help you? What worked, and how do you understand why it worked?
Excellent questions, and I don't have a complete answer. I have my own experience. When I started with a class of seniors, and fortunately I had a very patient teacher. I couldn't stand very well. I was using a cane at the time, which I did off and on for 15 years. And she talked about this energy ball with your hands facing each other and the energy in between your hands, and just breathe in and you expand this ball out to the side, and then you contract it as you exhale. And started with that. And I was sitting in a chair, and she said, just visualize those movements that you can't do. When I stood up, I had to use the back of a chair. For a year and a half, the two things that I did, I sat in a chair for Tai Chi class for the first year and a half. I worked with this energy ball. I did it twice a day at home. And I also, when I call relearn to walk, my walking was off with using a cane and having mobility problems. Not only was my stride off, but I felt like I was limping a little. My gait was up. So there is a Tai Chi walk that is focusing on the standing leg rather than the one that's moving forward. And you put your foot down and your leg, we call it like rooting like a tree, pick the other one up and then put that one down, and then focus for a couple of seconds on that. Like, it helps balance. You'll hear, and there's a lot of studies that Tai Chi is good for balance. And that's one of the reasons that it is. So I would get in my little hallway in my apartment, and at least once a day, I would try doing the walk. It was about 6 feet. I think that getting in my body, it helped me start to really get into my body, along with the work I did with the acupuncturist. And I started to let go in my mind of trying to figure things out or what's going on. I just said, let's just be here in this moment. I don't know what this energy ball is doing. I don't know if it's doing any good, but I'm going to try it. And the walking, the discipline, I think one of the things that really helped was my discipline. Is I went home and I did, it was just 10 minutes. I did it. I thought I need to do it. Why not? What's the alternative? So fortunately, I was disciplined to be able to do that. And I mentioned that because I've been teaching Tai Chi now for a number of years, and I mentioned that. And some people have a real hard time getting themselves to take the 5 or 10 minutes to do something like what I'm talking about. So I think it was perseverance, sticking with it, and feel that there's some in Tai Chi. Tai Chi is both a mental and physical discipline of slow moving movements, shifting weight, very methodically and in a slow way. People have probably seen Tai Chi in a park and it looks like a dance, but it's shifting weight, turning from the waist, learning how to connect your whole body, that your arms are connected with your torso and your turn from the waist and the hips, uh, was very soothing. And there's something with the group doing it together, the energy of the group doing it together, that we all were just focusing on the moment. And I say today, even, you're focusing on an energy ball and breathing and your breath. You're not thinking about anything else. And that helps with letting go. And that's what Tai Chi is about letting go rather than trying harder.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that in Tai Chi. And lots of times we just keep trying harder. We need to try. I'm not one to say, well, just don't try. It's not up to you. It is. We have to do things for ourselves. But a big part is letting go. So I don't know if that's a good answer to your question, but in terms of how it helped, I don't know the scientific part of how,
yeah.
how it
Well,
helped.
I think it's a great answer, and I want to mirror back to you how I'm thinking about it in
Okay.
terms of my system and my way of thinking about it. And maybe it'll even make sense to you of what you're seeing. There are all kinds of things that can be brought together to make things better, and there's lots of different elements to it. Structure is one of them. So, to feel like you have a system, something to devote your energy to that makes sense in any way, that can lead to a sense of hope. And it can lead to more activity in the direction of getting better. So that's one thing. You mentioned connection also.
Yes.
Connection also helps. In these experiences that people have, I think it can bring about isolation, hopelessness, rage,
Yes.
a lot of things that separate us. And reconnecting really helps. But I also think that you were dialing down fear. Because
Yes.
even if you couldn't understand what was happening, you could at least dial down the fear. But there's one other point, and I think actually this is the most important one as I understand it. You were starting to see that shifts in your mental state or your mental activity led to shifts in the physical.
Absolutely.
That, to me, was the ultimate key. The other things are important factors, but that one was the key.
And so it gives me little chills to hear you say that, because it resonates with me so much in terms of what you're saying. It is a shift from I can do from I can't do. And even if that's one step forward, and I say that it's one step forward, it's not running a marathon in terms of having to go the 26 miles. It's a marathon in terms of it's a long haul and not an overnight thing. The other thing that resonates in what you're saying, it all resonates with me, is that I learned in a seminar from a wise person who said we tend to fear what we don't know. And the thoughts we have today are the thoughts we had yesterday, and the thoughts we'll have tomorrow are the thoughts we have today. And whatever we're fearing, we're going to continue to do that. And let's think about the possibility that what we know is more fearful than what we don't know. And that really resonated with me. How do I get new thoughts? How do I empty my mind to get new thoughts? And what I ended up doing was, I call it jumping off a cliff, when I went and I called Nancy that one day. I didn't know what I was doing. And I jumped in the unknown. And it was like you're talking about, it was taking some action, just really helped dampen down that fear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the hope for new ideas, because
hope for new ideas is a better way to say it.
If we don't have new ideas, how are we going to change anything? Something needs to change. So, okay, now you wrote a book, and I want to finish up on this for today.
Sure.
You wrote a book called Walking on Pins and Needles, a memoir of chronic resilience in the face of multiple sclerosis. And I want to ask you, when did it occur to you to write this book, and why did it feel so important to do?
It occurred to me to write the book when I started writing down my experiences, when I was seeing Nancy, the acupuncturist, going through what I was going through. I wrote down what I was feeling because I didn't understand it. And I thought, well, maybe this will be helpful to help me as I go through these months and go through these years, and keeping a journal. So then it was when I started to teach Tai Chi that my students said, Arlene, your story, you need to write a book. You need to write a book because hearing your story was a key for me, not just thinking about doing something good for my health, but actually taking a step to do something. I took a class, or I'm talking to my partner, and she's going to do something. It doesn't have to be a class. Get out and walk every day. And I had enough of that I thought, okay, I started writing it down and thought, well, maybe this could become a book. I had hoped to inspire others to take that step, because thinking about taking a step, the distance between thinking about it and actually taking it can be a very long space.
Yes, it can.
For people. And we have to be ready. And I'm sorry, what was the second part? You asked me something else.
I wanted to, you actually answered it, because the second part was, why did you feel it was so important?
Why did I feel it so important?
And I think you nailed it. These stories are so important. This is one of the reasons I'm so grateful for you coming here to tell your story. Each and every story we tell, whether it's yours or mine, because I had 8 years of back pain that I did not think was going to get better. I didn't understand it at all. Right. Our stories, they not only can provide hope in that we got better, but as we describe how we got better and why we got better, they can also make sense of things. And speaking of bringing new thoughts to people, I think that's what we're doing. And so you're bringing new thoughts to people, and it's going to change a lot of lives. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you. That's just excellent. If we can do that together today, that is just the best. One new idea, or just thinking that I can have some new ideas. I have some hope.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for doing your part, Arlene. Thank you for joining me here. And I look forward to staying connected as we make our, different but parallel journeys into helping other people based on what we experience.
I do too. We're on a similar path in terms of how we're helping people in different ways. I love that. And Dan, I just really enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for coming, Arlene.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Fascinating story, what Arlene shared here, and a harrowing one. You hear what she's been through since the age of 22 and all the doubts that she had about whether she could get better, all the uncertainty that was piling up. And one of the things that was particularly interesting to me is the fact that she really actually wasn't that afraid at first, which is really interesting. A lot of people get kicked into fear and doubt earlier, and those symptoms get crystallized and drawn out into a longer form. It took a little while for her to get there because she was able to move past it so easily, but eventually it started to build up. All the questions, all the wondering what was happening, the fear that it was going to get worse, and you could see that the symptoms went up. And then it was also interesting to talk to her about a very different way of going about how she did go about healing. And Tai Chi is not something that I know about super directly, but as she talked about it, what I found is, wow, all of these different formats, they access one main function. Changing thoughts leads to changing physiologies. And you could see when I said it to her, it lit up. It was something that she could connect to and agree with. And now she's written a book. She's bringing this information to all of you. So it's new information. It's new ways of thinking. I'm very grateful to Arlene for that. And it was a pleasure sitting with her and talking to her about her story. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and we'll get back to you personally.